Poddin My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Poddin My Noggin. This week, we are joined by a Good Samaritan. I would think, that's what I would say. John David Graham, welcome to the show.
Very glad to be here, CK. Thank you. On this very cold, wintry night.
Yes, where are you?
Well, I'm in Western Ohio right now,
Okay,
and
fair.
it's sub-zero, so we're watching all our houses to make sure they don't freeze. And what makes matters worse is I do my writing in Texas, and it snowed there last night, which is about a once in every 20-year occurrence. So everywhere I go, my butt's in a sling.
Fair. I was popped onto social media earlier today and was seeing a bunch of people doing things and it was all surrounded by I've never gotten to do this before or first time trying something like this, and it was involving the snow. So I'm in Canada. We're also getting quite the cold snap, but I'm on Eastern Canada. We're not nearly as cold as Western Canada is right now. Central Canada is very cold right now. So, well, I hope you stay warm and I hope your house doesn't freeze because I know it gets cold in Ohio. You, my friend, are a interesting character. I read what you provided me in the form that everyone fills out. And I thought to myself, I had to read it a couple times. So typically what happens with it, when someone comes on my show, through the platform that we use, either it seems like they're a good fit or they're not a good fit. Perfect. I make that decision based on either what you say in your profile or what you say in your message. We match, and then I don't look at anything again until just before the podcast. The reason I do that is because I like authentic conversations as opposed to rehearsed or scripted or me coming up with 1,000 questions. Yeah. So about an hour ago, I sat down and I kind of went through your notes, and I had to read them twice. And I'll tell you why I had to read them twice. I loved how you started off. I'm just going to read it aloud if you don't mind. So I am very familiar with second, third, and fourth chances that many of us need to reach our goals. It is in developing what I call calloused hands and a tender heart along the way. I thought that was really quite beautiful. But I think what caused me to have to read it twice was you listing your ages next to things. So I think I read them, and then when I got to the last one, it's when your age clicked in my head. I'm not ageist whatsoever, but I think that your life so far is really cool. And I want people to hear about what you've done. But if you don't mind, could we go back to early days for John David Graham and what made you so familiar with second, third, fourth chances? What was that? What is that story?
I grew up in the 60s, and it was an extremely unstable time. In fact, when I was in elementary school in the 50s, we had drills on how to duck to avoid a nuclear attack on our schools. So we were to get under our desk, and that would save us from a Russian attack, of course. But we grew up with that reality, and polio too. So we went into the 60s, and suddenly it became political, and everything was against everything else. You were for the war, you were against the war, you were Archie Bunker, you were Meathead, you were a peacenik, you were a true-blooded American patriot.
What is peacenik? I've never heard that term before.
Oh, you are young. Peacenik would be someone who gave the peace symbol, who said, I'm opposed to Vietnam.
So like a hippie.
Oh, hippie, yeah, it would be the next step. The term originally was beatnik because they came out of the 50s, and then because you were beatnik and you were hip, and then it became hippie, and then when it became political with Vietnam, it was peacenik. It was a derogatory term, which became actually a term of endearment. So, but the country was extraordinarily divided. And the truth is that I'm seeing today very
Hmm.
similar.
Absolutely.
And the difference is that I think it's more systemic, it's more fundamental. We're looking at the foundations uh, of our thought process. The foundations of our faith are in question. The foundations of our political system is in question. In 68, we disagreed on the expression. We disagreed on the direction. Today, I think we disagree on the very definition. And
Hmm.
that to me is much more concerning. So, all that chaos, then you couple in the changing of the industrial world into a service industry, the auto plants, and then the steel mills, where I grew up in Pittsburgh, where everybody worked in the steel mill. You didn't say, where do you work? You say, what trick or what shift do you work? Because that was just what they had done for 150 years. And they disappeared. So everything was unstable. And out of that, coupled with all the politics, I graduated from college with a degree in psychology and no idea what to do with it. So that's where you saw that detoured career, where I was a children's home counselor, I was a truck driver, I was a fireman, I was a building contractor, I was a journalist, and I was even a minister at one point, thinking that I could make an impact on the community. And the truth was that when you start behind, without the family, without the emotional or the structure that is needed for stability, that most of life is just going to work, just showing up every day and doing your daily job. And so I was always looking for the rainbow, always looking for something better. And at one point before I met my wife, I was even homeless. I gave up jobs that other people would have died to have, but I wasn't satisfied because probably, I don't want to say spiritual, but it was an internal issue. And being homeless, even though it was a short time, and it was by my own choices, my own flaws, and the current economics, it left an indelible mark because I know what it's like to look at the sky and say, if it rains, where will I sleep tonight? And
Hmm.
I was living in my truck when they repossessed it. So you can imagine. So, but I will say this, that I met my wife and she married me in spite of it. And
You met your wife
the
when you were homeless?
actually I was they repossessed my truck, and I was on my way to California at the time, so I stopped by her church thinking I can get a free meal, and one meal led to another and another, and we started dating. And she said, the first thing you've got to do, cowboy, is get a job. So
Now, I have a question to ask because while I was waiting for you to join, I watched your book trailer.
yeah,
And would this woman be Kate?
a prototype. Yeah, she's
Okay.
the inspiration. In fact, today is our 48th anniversary, and I put a video out there today saying that she was the prototype or the inspiration for Kate. Even though it is fictional,
Hmm.
obviously all fiction comes out of some reality. Uh,
Absolutely. You always sort of interweave parts of your own experiences when you're writing fiction.
well, the people around her said, "Don't marry him. He's a rake and a rambler. He's not stable. He's not one of us." And she did marry me, and today, I kid her sometimes saying, "You just stay with me just to prove your friends wrong." So, but the truth was that she gave me the stability, and there's something about having your best friend as a partner. So
Mm.
we're not here to have children. We're not here to simply have a partnership of convenience. She's the one I want to talk to about my ideas, and she's also the one who went through all the thick and thins when we traveled from state to state, job to job after married. And I was 53 years old after 8 careers, failed careers probably, when I finally said, let's do something different. Let's help people like us who are struggling more than us. So we bought the oldest, cheapest house in town, fixed it up, and used it as a homeless shelter and started Good Samaritan Home. and
And
everything
that's
changed.
amazing, right? So like I think that that's amazing. If you go to John's website, which is johndavidgraham.com, you can see a picture of the house in its initial state and then see a picture of the house now,
Yeah.
right? And so there is a marked difference there in how it looks. But okay, so my wheels are turning. So you meet you're the love of your life. She gives you something that you hadn't had, I guess. She
Yes.
fills
That's a very good
somewhat
way
of
to
a
put it.
void.
Very good.
Um, and I think what's interesting is I'm noticing similarities. Like I wasn't homeless on the brink, but I went quite a number of days without eating because I was that poor, and I learned a very valuable life lesson that I like to impart on everyone is don't eat all bran when you haven't eaten for 3 days.
That's right.
It's like razor blades. So like there's similarities there, and then while not my partner, very similarly, meeting my best friend, what she gave that sort of stability and unconditional love helped me become the version of who I am today. So I think that that's really beautiful when you find partnerships that way. So you moving all over the place, you're working all over the place, you had many, many different jobs, right? But like, how did you go from that to let's buy an old house, fix it up, and help others? Like what helped me understand that transition?
Well, my last job was as my one attempt to be civilized in the community was to be a small church minister, thinking that I could counsel and teach. But as you see today, politics can enter the church, and particularly if it's based on, do we like you? We vote for our congressmen based on how we like them. Do they make us feel good? And we do the same in the church. It doesn't matter. Do they help us? Do they enhance our belief? Do they offer leadership? Basically, it comes down to did you visit me last Friday when I was in the hospital and you should have known? And and I just, it was like being in a room and not knowing where the chairs are. I just didn't
Mm-hmm.
know the rules of being civilized. And that's because I grew up, I don't, uncivilized implies that it was you're living in a jungle, but some of us grew up in an emotional jungle. And so what we did was I found, and we started working with homeless people because they had been coming to my door as a pastor, and the church did not encourage helping them because they're not one of us. That probably was the divider. And
Makes
I was
sense.
very concerned that uh, what I believe is that we're accountable for our neighbors, even when our neighbors are not nice. We have to treat them nice as best we can. And homeless are not like us, perhaps, but they are us. Scratch the
Mm-hmm.
surface, they could be us. And so that's why we said, let's help those. If we have been outcast, let's help those who are outcast. And uh, but what happened was, in the process, the Department of Correction said, you have a shelter. We have men coming back to the community from prison who are homeless. And if they can get a place that's stable, research shows that they will likely never commit another crime. They just need a house so they can get a job. So
Mm-hmm.
our shelter is not a halfway house, it became a transition house. And
How
they
long
get
was your shelter open before they came they came to you about that?
I'd say we started in '01, and I
Okay.
started I started volunteering with the Department of Correction to help people while they're incarcerated, and I think it was at least 5 years. So we were remodeling the house the whole time and living
And
in it.
but clearly doing good work as well with
Yes.
the homeless community.
Well, what happened? The trigger was just after we were open for a year. The Department of Correction said, "We have one man who's coming out. Will you take him in your house?" And we did, but the community got wind of it, and all hell broke loose. because we were bringing in a dangerous felon, they said. And the truth was, he was black, which scared some people. He was
Mm.
from the city, which scared others, but mostly he wasn't us. It was the eternal other. And the truth was, he was as afraid of the white community as they were of him. And there were petitions passed, there were calls to the city council, there were ordinances passed, there were threats, there were lawsuits. It took 7 years of back and forth lawsuits before we finally cleared the final hurdle and were free to operate in the community. But
Oh,
what that
wow.
did, CK, what it taught me was, if you believe something, and if it's difficult, and if you're willing to pay the price, then that becomes an integral part of your personality and your faith. And I think of it like, we like to think that if a crisis arises, that we'll do the good thing. But I've found that it's in the little things where we try to do little good things. And so being not a witness, but an example in the neighborhood by not returning their hostility, by not giving back the same response they gave to us. Eventually, by being a good neighbor, mostly by, in the winter, I cleaned everybody's sidewalk without saying a word. And I call it snow shovel philosophy. But eventually, I joke about it, but it's true. Those same people who waved at us with one finger now use all their fingers. So
I love this. I love this. I'm really enjoying this conversation because like I'm getting this vibe from you that you have a deep-rooted faith, but it's the kind of faith that draws you in as opposed to pushes you away, right? And so I've talked about this on my podcast before. We have Christians who weaponize Christ, and they're very loud, and they are running the U.S. right now. But then we have true Christians, which I have met in an abundance. They're not so loud, and they're like you. They're the small acts and the kindness. And I remember, I think a couple months back, just saying the real Christians need to get up and get out there. They don't need to speak. They need to act, because actions speak louder than words. And so you being this blight on the community, as you will, because they were not happy that you were doing what you were doing and that you had a black man in your house who was a convicted felon. By you being consistent in your actions, steadfast in your faith, and showing up consistently, you turned those people who were against you into people who were your neighbors. That's powerful.
it was not a decision that we simply said, this is what I will do because of my doctrines. It was something we just, I think when your faith becomes a part of you, it's integral. It's like your marriage. You don't say, today I'm going to be nice to my wife because she is my wife. You say, and I'm grumpy today, but I know that I still love her, and we move on, and she's listening to me right now, so I have to thank her for this.
Of course, this is conversation too, and I'm mindful of the time, but there's a conversation I often have with people. I work in consulting, so I work with a lot of different people. And I often tell them that in life, you should always be kind, but know that there is a huge distinction in being nice and in being kind, right? And I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. So I feel like nice is just an action, a
Yeah.
pleasantry.
It's a kiss on the
I'm just
cheek,
gonna be,
and
yeah,
then you criticize
exactly.
somebody behind their back.
Yeah, but whereas kindness is deeply rooted and it moves with you through your decisions and your interactions in life. You can be firm and assertive with an individual, create boundaries. These are all acts of self-kindness that ends up outwards. So I feel like that's very much the same way as I look at the true Christian. And I use air quotes a lot, but it's a part of who you are as a human being, and making sure that in everything you do and whatever you interaction you have, you do it through kindness. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to be right back.
This month, join our Valentine's Quilt Sweepstakes, hosted by Poddin My Noggin and made by CK Sims. Enter for the chance to win the Valentine's quilt and matching pillow by subscribing to Poddin My Noggin's YouTube channel. The sweepstakes will run from February 1st to February 28th, when the winner will be announced. Additionally, you can receive 10 extra entries by purchasing the Easy Beginners Digital Quilt Pattern Valentine's Edition. Check out the sweepstakes rules below and access the link in the description to enter today.
Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today. Partner today with CK Sims and Poddin My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours.
Welcome back, everybody. We are talking to John David Graham, the co-owner, because his wife is listening off to the side somewhere. Hello, wife. He and his wife started the Good Samaritan Home in 2001. Before the break, he was talking about the different stages of his life, meeting his wife, how she was the inspiration for the character Kate in one of his books, and the struggles he faced when they first started this Good Samaritan Home and welcoming in a ex-con, if you will, who was Black in the community, wasn't happy about it. So you went through a lot. So 7 years approximately, you had said, where you finally cleared the last hurdle. And by your actions of the snow clearing philosophy, I think you said, you were able to turn those individuals into people who waved with you with all fingers instead of just one, which I love that saying as well. Throughout that 7-year process, right? How long was this first gentleman living with you in this house?
Reggie was with us, I'd say less than a year, but
okay.
We don't measure return to prison or recidivism rate because normally it takes 3 years. What we do is say, while you're with us, if you abide by our rules, our guidelines, they're not rules really, it's just general housekeeping issues. Good. It's what you do in a dormitory or a boarding house. Be respectful to your housemates. And Reggie, as with all people, he brought in his culture. He brought in his personality, and we had our ups and downs. But the thing was, we respected one another. And he eventually moved out, got a job, moved out into another house, and then got married, and then disappeared. But every once in a while, he'd call me. Well, just 2 months ago, he called me. He said, I'm still out, and I haven't been in any trouble. I've been driving truck, and I'm doing very well. I'm married. I've raised her kids. And he said, I just read your book. So, and that's been 23, 24 years that we're still in touch with Reggie. And that to me it's one of the capstones I look at and say he was our first, and he's still in contact. So And it was not a perfect situation. He wasn't perfect. We were learning. I wasn't perfect. But just like all friendships, particularly when there's a power disparity, because it was our house and he was
Mm-hmm.
coming in as our guest, and he was black and we were white, and there's a lot of learning that goes with that.
Of course.
Even learning how people talk to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Poor people have a different cultural response than, say, middle class white, or we call it the white expectation, white privilege. It's different. I'm learning that everybody comes from a different culture. And sometimes we just need to shut up and just get to know one another. But
Listen.
you just listen. But I would say, sitting here listening to you retell very well my story, I think what it comes down to, if I could summarize it, is, to me, faith is summarized in the term second chances.
Mm.
That the best way to share our faith or to tell our faith is to shut up and just give somebody a second chance.
Or a
And
third, or a fourth.
absolutely. And the Bible says it in very formal language. I forgive as you are forgiven by God. But sometimes forgiving means simply saying, I don't agree with what you did, but I'll give you another chance. You're welcome. And we do that by letting guys come back who have fallen down or made mistakes. And some people have struggled with us, but yet they come back saying, I need another chance because of their issues or their addictions. And we do it.
So essentially, you've created a safe haven for displaced men coming out of prison.
And women
And
now, it's a small
and
number,
women.
but yes, yeah. But yes,
So
yes.
that's something worth mentioning. So when you started in 2001, and you finally got over you had the one house, right? And I
Yes.
do wish everyone that's listening go on and take a look at the house before and the house after. And then now you have 17 houses.
Well, actually, when I wrote that original draft, it's 19 houses.
19 houses.
Yeah, we keep
So
growing because the need is so great.
and so have you grown outside of you and your wife, or is it still just you and your wife that is doing this work? Do you own these properties? Like that sort of thing. How does that work? How did you scale up?
We started off using our own monies for everything. Even though it was a nonprofit corporation, we had a board of directors and an attorney and an accountant. Everything had to be above board, but with still a lot of it was our own money. And we invested.
Mm.
This house around us, you see here, that's part of the inside of that house. That's all been redone over the years because the house was virtually falling down. And we invested everything we had, and we bought a second house and remodeled it, then bought a third one and remodeled it, because the need was so great that we now have the 19 houses in 3 counties. And on any given day, we have upwards of 80 to 100 men and women and 10 staff. So they do the day to day.
Wow. So
Yeah, it's so that when I eventually retire or pass on or get thrown to the curb, they'll replace me. So Good Samaritan and its work will continue.
so that's a legacy that you have created and are now going to leave behind.
I
Um,
hope, yeah, because I don't want to be a one and done. I would rather see others carry on, and because it's not about me. I just happen to have the vision, but I
mhm.
want people who can make that vision run every day.
Well, you had more than just vision. You had drive. You had a
Yeah,
partner in crime, right? Because, right, your wife played that role. You started the one house. You had every reason or every good reason to say bail out after a year when you took on your first ex-convict and all of the issues that you faced,
and
right? So,
that's the essence of faith. We're not doing it for a corporation or a board of directors or for a paycheck. We're doing it as an example of our faith.
and
It
so
sounds
I
trite,
do.
but we're doing it to God.
No, and I accept that and I applaud that, right? There you can tell with your story that there is very much an element of not self-service, service, and that it's not you were not out to make, $1 million or anything like that. I don't think you get into this type of business or this type of lifestyle because you're thinking about becoming the biggest you possibly can become, right? This is a life of service that you've taken on.
When George Bush started his faith-based initiative back in 2001, a lot of faith groups jumped into it because they saw grant money. And in my area alone, there were 20 similar groups doing similar work. All of them are gone except ours. And I think it's because exactly what you described. They were looking for the dollars, looking for the headlines. They wanted to be the next Martin Luther King or Billy Graham. And the truth is, you got to take a broom and be the next janitor. That's how you serve.
Absolutely. I think that is absolutely fascinating. So 19, and so you've written this. So as a result of your work, more than 1,000 men and women have been offered a second chance at life through Good Samaritan Home.
Well, numbers are actually 2,500 so far.
That's so okay. So you got to update your website because currently it says 1,000.
Well,
so that's a big difference.
It changes. Things change daily. I would definitely take a look. But I think what happened when I started podcasting, I started to do a hard number search, and some of the early resumes. But I was amazed when I saw that.
That's an incredible number of people to have helped in a single lifetime.
Well, I like to think people ask, have we seen any transformed lives? And I wouldn't say I've seen any miracles, but what I have seen, people stay out of jail. I've seen Reggie get a job. I saw Walter get a job.
That's a miracle, no?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And maybe on a practical level, there's Jimmy, who was 67 years old when he came to us, freezing in his truck in winter, dying, and he stayed with us for 14 years until eventually he died of cancer in our house. He said this was the only home he ever had. He died when he was 81 years old. He found a family in our house, and he was, on a good day, he was difficult to live with, but I think of him like the beggar at the gate. And if you walk by the beggar, God will hold you accountable for not helping in some way. And so he was literally dying at our gate. So
we're 76 years old now, right? You are?
Yes, 76.
So in 4 years, you'll be 80. What does you and your wife think about running for president?
That's funny. I think because I regard my soul too sacred to give it up.
Fair. That's totally fair. Because you know what? I would love to. Here's the thing. I am, I guess, an oxymoron in many people's minds. I'm a gay Christian. I grew up in the church. Both my parents are pastors. I love God. I live to be like Jesus. I am gay. I didn't choose this. This is who I am. This is my walk with Christ. I'll find out Judgment Day what his final say is, right?
Very good answer.
I love I love Christianity in its purest form, where you are like, to live like Jesus lived. You helped your neighbor. You stood up for your neighbor, you talk to the poor, the sinners, all of those things. He lived a life of service. We have these Christians who are weaponizing Christ, who are into politics, who are trying to strip people of their rights and all of those things. And I don't see Jesus in them.
Yeah.
I don't see Jesus in them. I see man only. I would love for someone to be in the White House, in Parliament Hill in Canada, who was a Christian who lived to be like Jesus and understood that through acts of service and kindness as a nation and as neighboring nations, we could heal. We could do so much good for everybody if we came together in that way. I don't want to end this. I've loved this conversation so far. I really want to touch base. So first off, I only thought you wrote one book, but then I realized by going through your website that you wrote an academic book as well. So
Right.
Citizen Cycle, a mentoring model for rehabilitating ex-offenders in Drake County, Ohio. So like you must have some pretty incredible stories, I would imagine, from the last 24, 25 years doing this work. Um, and I like how you said you haven't seen miracles, but you've seen people not go back to jail. To me, I feel that that's a miracle, right? I
Yeah.
think the miracle in itself was you and your wife meeting, building a life together, and then deciding to take on service. So there's your miracle. You bought that old house, right? That needed a lot of work. You built that together, and then you built a safe space that you kept multiplying over the years. The miracle is the work that you've done, right? Those men needed a place to go. So the question wasn't, were they going to go? They're going to go because it's a place, it's warm food, it's all of those things. You holding that space, you having that home and multiple homes, I think that's what the miracle was for everybody in that process, is that they had, I've lost his name, but the one who lived with you until he passed away.
Oh, Jimmy.
Jimmy, yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's a miracle to me. You created something for so many people who would have otherwise been discarded and lost, and gave them something that they could belong to or that they could find refuge in. And Reggie, the first one, still reaching out to you after 24 years to tell you that he read his book. If you hadn't impacted his life, he wouldn't do that, right? And I'm not blowing smoke at this moment. I feel like sometimes, you just have to call a spade, right? What you guys have done in this short period of time has been a miracle.
I think in your own way, you've actually pulled away all the peripheral issues and gotten to the core of Christianity, what it's intended to be. And it's going to the least of these that no one else will help. And you help them in the name of God with the actions of God. And then the rest, you just let God work out the details.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to give them your doctrines because your hands and feet will speak your doctrines louder than your lips.
Love that. I love that. And that is the lesson, right? That is the overarching lesson always, is your actions speak louder than words. And we don't need to tell people what to do. We can show people what to do.
And you mentioned sexual identity. I attend church in Texas, downtown in the old San Fernando Cathedral, and it's 300 years old, and it's all in Spanish. And I don't speak Spanish. I pick up words, but I can feel the service. I feel like I'm in God's presence. But three of my good friends there are gay men. And in the Catholic Church, that's a struggle for them.
Mm-hmm.
But we have found ourselves on common ground because we all come to worship the same God. And we don't get into our differences or whatever they may be on anything. We simply say, we're here for the same purpose. And I just ran into Oscar just a while ago. He lost his partner of 48 years just last fall. And that was a very sad moment for him and for me because I knew his partner. And I think that's where God was. God was feeling Oscar's pain.
Well, and it's one of those things. It took me many years to come to a point where I could say do both. I could be both at peace. Because for 35 years, I was not at peace, right? Religious dogma and nuclear family belief systems, all of that sort of hardwired in your brain. It took a long time. It was my sister who helped me find that peace, by the way. But yes, I love to meet people who love Jesus and don't judge others. It's so simple, but so hard for people to grasp. And that's why I always say, and this is how I rationalized it in my mind, is that, and this is kind of judgy, but they're not real Christians. Because if you weaponize Christ, then you're using the Bible to harm others. That was never what the Bible was supposed to do. Christ would, if he was, but I also love the ideology that if Christ were to walk into Congress today, he would be kicked out for being the woke DEI pick.
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. Like he could show up here today to all these
Yeah.
proclaimed Christians who throw around hate, and he would be rejected as anybody else would. Right? So it's one of those things. Your second book, the one that I watched the my gosh, trailer on,
Yeah.
it is as running as fast as I can. Tell us about it.
Well, when I was going through the conflict and trying to explain to critics how important it was to offer somebody a second chance, I had reams of data from my research, and I approached it like trying to a debate. And I had educated people, not just people in the neighborhood, but I had attorneys and I had judges saying, "I don't care about the facts. I just don't like those people." And that told me that people learn and listen with their emotions, with their fear, and that's why we see this last election. Fear really elected Mr. Trump. He
Mm-hmm.
created fear, and people voted on fear. So I like to compare it to if you're going on a cruise and you're trying to convince people they need to know where the lifeboats are. So you give a documentary on lifeboat safety. Here's how you handle the ropes. Here's how you handle the life jackets. Nobody's going to listen. But if you show Titanic, the movie, and you show Jack and Rose, suddenly everybody wants to know how to find the lifeboats, because if Jack and Rose had a lifeboat, their love could have lasted forever. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what running as fast as I can is. It's a Titanic story, a story of survival against the odds of Daniel and Kate. And it's a story of second and third and fourth chances that readers are not just reading it. I'm getting reviews that are emotional. They're saying, I felt Daniel. I just wanted the Daniel. He made those mistakes that I made, and then I cheered when he finally saw the truth and turned around. But I cried with him when he had that situation that I can't tell you about. But it's a real story, like Forrest Gump going through history, but learning and growing from. Instead of being crippled like Forrest, Daniel was crippled emotionally because
Mm-hmm.
he had been abused and he had been sexually abused by the one man he trusted, his pastor. So he had all those issues, but yet in Kate, he found acceptance and a second, third chance. And together they created a family that they both wanted. And so it's definitely a Kleenex story. But
Well, I want to read it now, and I mean, I wanted to read it. So where? So for me and for people listening at home, where can they pick this book? In bookstores? Is it online?
it primarily Amazon. What I'd recommend is go to my website, johndavidgraham.com, and the link to Amazon. The trailer will link you, and you can even download 2 or 3 or 4 chapters for free and take a look at it. But it's the truth is it's an easy read because it's a very readable story, and if you're not crying at the end on some level, in some way, then
You're
there's
dead
something
inside.
wrong. Yeah.
This is
Yeah,
what I can say. You're
I've
just
read it 1,000 times and I still cry at certain scenes. And I get mad at Daniel for making the same damn mistakes.
well. So to me, what's interesting is that it sounds very appealing to me, but where it's bizarre because my favorite genre, I read a lot. Favorite genre is thriller suspense, and I don't know why, but like the more screwed up the and demented the story may be, I'm like, oh, this is so cool. I feel very relaxed. But then when I think about the book that you have written, that now I do want to actually read, I feel like, okay, I know that's going to probably take me on an emotional ride, right? So it's something I have to like steady myself for and sit down to read the book and enjoy the book. And if the emotions come, let them roll out, right? Sit with them. Um, so I'm weird like that. So, but I do want to read it because you just mentioned a couple things that I was like, oh, okay, I didn't think of that, or so now I want to know what's at the end, the last mistake that he does. Um,
Events happen in life and it's not your fault and it's not your mistake. It just happens. The
mhm.
Bible says it rains on the just and the unjust. And when things that are unfair happen to us, we rail out. Sometimes we rail against our neighbors or against God. But that's where the real learning comes, because life is hard and shit happens, as we say. And what are you
Mhm.
going to do with it? And I just read a piece in the from the Atlantic magazine just tonight about how there's a tendency for Christians to pray for success or pray for popularity or pray for wealth. And he said, it doesn't happen that way. You pray to get through the hard times, and then you work at getting through it. And if you're rich or poor, it's irrelevant. It's how you live toward one another. And Daniel's greatest learning comes at the end when he has to live through some of that raw, raw life that he had come against him. And ironically, there's one scene, I will tell you this, that he had taken in a man from prison that he felt was unjustly imprisoned. And at one point, this black man who had a fourth grade education, and Daniel by this time had a doctorate in theology, and Daniel says that Charles has no education. He's been in prison almost all of his life. I have 3 degrees, but he knows more about forgiveness than I know. He's become my teacher. And
I
there
love that.
we see that the whole thing of life is that by our students we are taught.
Of course.
Yeah.
I remember actually, I was very young and babysitting in my small town in Newfoundland where I lived. And this man told me, I babysit his and his wife's kids. And I was cleaning up. And I don't know why, but because I would never do it now, but I didn't put the cutlery in the sink first, right? Apparently that's a thing, right? Or it was a thing. I didn't know. And so this man had told me that you put the cutlery in, and I was one of those kids who were a little bit brazen, if you will, a little bit argumentative, defiant. There's many words that my father would probably use to describe me as a child. And so I was just like, well, no, that's not how I do it. And then he was like, well, the reason you do this is because when you put the cutlery in first and you wash your dishes, at the end, when it's time to clean the cutlery, they've already had an opportunity to soak and get off a lot of the gunk. And so then you clean it and it's a lot easier. And it's interesting because this is such an old memory and I don't know why it came up, but he told me in that moment, you are never too old to learn. And if you get too old to learn, what's the point of life?
To be candid, I'm 76. My
Mhm.
wife is my age. On any given day, she's out patching walls in our houses. She's painting a ceiling. She's fixing trim. She's busier than I've ever been. But I feel like with all these projects that I'm 36, and I just hope I can get another 20 years in because I have so much I want to do, including 1 or 2 more sequels to tell more second chance stories.
That would be wonderful. But I mean, I think that's the best part, though, right? So at 61, you finished your doctorate.
Right.
At 75, you published your award-winning debut novel. So, and then at 76, you took an acting job as an extra on a television series. So, like, that's fascinating. And what I love also about you right now is ageism does exist in this world, right? So if I were to meet you in the street, I would never guess that you were 76-year-old. You don't present or you don't act 76-year-old. You don't look 76-year-old. In my mind of what I think I envision 76 years old to look like, which is being constantly redefined anyway, every day that I continue to live. I love that at 76, you still have like so much to do. You're hoping that you have 20 more years at least to fit all of it in. That zest for life and that zest for service, like I think that's going to serve you well in aging well, being healthy. So I have another question because I'm being mindful of time. So is the first house that you purchased, the one that you're in right now, you said,
Yes.
is this your primary residence?
Yes, we've been here since 2001, and we tried to restore it to its 1879 feeling. And so I want people to come in and just breathe and relax. And so it's not a program house. It's where we do our administrative, obviously, but it's my retreat too, because dealing with people who are emotionally struggling and physically struggling is exhausting.
Of
So
course.
yeah, and that's what I do when I write. It's my way to get away and to try to think through something without distractions. And no matter how noble your intent, people can be exhausting.
Absolutely. Without question.
Yeah, and I'm
Yeah,
an introvert too,
absolutely.
so I prefer being alone, quite frankly.
I am the exact same way, but also have a heart for others and the world and just want people to be kind to each other. And
Yeah.
what my way of trying to spread that message is to start a podcast and talk to really incredible people like such as yourself.
Well, this is
So,
probably the most fun I've had in a long time, so it goes two ways.
well, I appreciate that, and it's about the conversations, right? I like, yeah, you catch so many wonderful things when you're just having a conversation, as opposed to like bullet
Well, I
point
give you the
questions.
credit because you're directing it, so thank you, CK.
Well, thank you, John David Graham. Not, and I have to tell this. I asked Mr. Graham at the beginning that John David Graham, and he was like, "Well, I'm three names on my book, so people don't mistake me for John Grisham." And I thought that that was very, very cute and funny because I can see it. If you remove the David and someone were to just quickly look, I could see that you might make that mistake.
I could make more
Uh,
money if they did, but
you could absolutely. But anyway, I want everyone to head on over to John David Graham, spelled exactly as it sounds. Graham used to always confuse me when I was younger, so it's GRAHAN.com. You can check out the house we've been talking about, his academic book. You can read newspaper columns where he's been featured, see a list of podcasts that he's been on. And then if you bookmark his website and keep checking back, you might actually see a sequel to Running as Fast as I Can, or a sequel or another book about second chances, which is the main takeaway here.
if I may, I want to, it's premature, but I want to share a little secret if I can. What I'm
Okay.
thinking about is meeting with inmates in the prison, people who have been in prison for a life or long time, and ask them to write a short story, which I will help them teach them how to write short stories through an extended training period in prison. But I would like to have them write an anthology of short stories focused in on what person or event changed your life forever. And the title of the book is A Broken Winged Bird Can't Fly. Now that's a draft, but that's what I'm thinking. You'll be getting stories. It would be writing from the inside. I wouldn't be the
Mm.
writer. I would be the editor. But
Mm-hmm.
my goal is to give voice to people who have no voice, but not to voice their grievances, but maybe to voice their feelings, to voice their emotions, maybe their aspirations. Now, if that works out, I think it could be very good. And if it doesn't work out, at least I've tried.
Well, it sounds that could potentially be very poignant to read, right? So, I think people will have to have open minds and open hearts when it comes to that sort of thing. I immediately would be compelled to read it because I'm not fascinated because I don't want to sort of sensationalize people going to prison, but to be imprisoned, and to live for very long periods of time confined that way. I often wonder how the human mind and the heart copes with that confinement and what internal sacrifices or compartmentalization has to take place, whether it's known or unknown, conscious or subconscious. Like those are the things that fascinate me. And I would be very interested. I've always been very interested in talking to people who have done things in life and have ended in ended up in prison, and similarly finding out how do they feel now versus how do they feel then.
In the book Running, Charles Vickers became a teacher to Daniel about forgiveness, but we centered a great deal on his prison time, his 20 years, and it was modeled on Mansfield Reformatory in Ohio, which was where Shawshank Redemption was filmed. And so we talked about being in a cage among 1,200 men in a screaming, hot and cold, depending on the season, hellhole. And what's it like to be there for 20 years of your life? And yet Charles was the model of forgiveness, because he said, I had to learn to forgive or die. And I would take that hatred I would feel would come with me, even if they freed me from prison. I had to let go of my hate. And so I'm hoping that we can get some real stories that come out of that. Now, again, it will be fiction. I don't want people just blaming the system or blaming somebody. I'd like to see some real literary work come out of it.
Of course, and give them the opportunity to achieve something that they may not otherwise have the opportunity to ever do.
Absolutely, because I think what I'm learning through all our residents is what they really want is to be heard. They want somebody to listen to them. And sometimes the best thing I ever do is just sit and say, tell me about your family, or tell me about your kids, and just let them talk. And then they think I've given them great answers, and I haven't.
Well, and it's really interesting how you just brought our whole podcast conversation completely full circle. Because at the beginning of this conversation, we established that one of your greatest lessons was to learn to listen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And that is one of our greatest tools in humanity to help anybody, is to just listen. Let them talk. Let them tell their stories.
I had a pastor come to me when I desperately needed support. And he said, do you ask the residents if they're saved? And I said, I only ask them if they're hungry. And he said, well, I can't support you then. And I never forgot that.
Yeah, see, there's conditions at church, and there's so many anecdotes about that as well, right? Like, you go to church and they turn around and they give you looks because you don't belong there. You're outsider, all those things.
Yeah,
you go to NA or AA and you're welcomed with open arms, right? So AA and church, you would think that you would have a more welcoming, wholesome experience in church. It's what you're led to believe, but it's not how it happens often. And yeah, that particular pastor, how wrong was he? But then the Lord must have been looking out for you, because you've been able to help so many people without him.
Well, the good news is I put that story in the book, and so I got back at him.
Good. I like that. Well, this has been an absolute treat for me to get to speak with you. I wish you continued success in your life, in your marriage, in your ventures in helping others, in your books and endeavors. I will bookmark your page. I am going to purchase Running as Fast as I Can, because but I won't read it right away. I will read it when I feel like, okay, I need that maybe emotional release, or I'm prepared to have that emotional roller coaster. But I am very interested in reading it. Thank you very much for being on the show.
My absolute pleasure. It's been a hard day because of the cold weather, watching all the work we have to do, and I get grumpy in the gray weather. But tonight I feel renewed, and I feel 69 instead of 76. So thank you.
Well, perfect. Great. That's wonderful. I appreciate that. I love connections. I love to make connections with people, not in the networking sort of frame of mind, but more in we're just two people. There's nothing more to it than that. We're two people with two lives, with two stories, connecting and having a conversation. So I'm happy that you had that experience. I have also had an equal experience. I feel inspired and I feel a little lighter than I did when I started this particular podcast this evening. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, CK. Thank you.
Say hello to your wife for me. I know she can hear me, but say hello. And I wish you all the very best. Thank you so much for being on the show. To everyone out there watching, go get the book, Running as Fast as I Can, by John David Graham. And until next time, go out there and live your wildest dreams.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.